Okay, I am Bradley Taylor. I'm representing Rockville Christi. I am a Catholic Christian. I am a senior, technically, but third year at UW. I'm majoring in physics, chemistry, and mathematics.
I'm Vincent. I'm a second year sophomore at Newman Center. I'm a Catholic, and I'm majoring in computer science.
Hi, I'm Michelle Fontes, pronouns she, her. I did my undergrad here and got my Bachelor's of Science in Psychology. I am now a PhD student in the philosophy department. I am a secular humanist. Yeah, so I guess this is on the website page, but generally philosophy of mind, neuroethics, I guess is where my research focuses on currently. Topics of AI, machine learning are super big interest. I'm super happy to be here. It's so exciting for me. So thank you. We have some questions. So starting off the first question, is it ethical for people to artificially create life? And if so, in what situations? Anybody want to start off?
I guess I can start. So first off, I think we need to define what artificial is, because it's a word that's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. So I mean, you could argue that, you know, breeding animals is artificially creating life because, you know, there's some sort of human hand in feeding and whatever. And so, but I don't think that's really what this is trying to get at. I think what we're trying to get at here is more along the lines of, you know, cloning or significant genetic modification of organisms. And broadly, whether or not that's moral, I think depends on what the what are the consequences of this. So like, you're trying to engineer some sort of super virus to kill a bunch of people, then yeah, that's probably, it's kind of immoral. But you know, if you're trying to, say, develop some sort of, I guess, plant to absorb a bunch of CO2 and, you know, try to in some attempt to stop climate change, then I think that's permissible. So I mean, I guess in general, I don't see a whole lot of situations in which it's really beneficial to do that, but I don't. But I think there are certainly situations in which it's not immoral.
Well, I would suggest that like cloning and processes like that still require some form of previously existing life at a starting point. So you're starting with living cells and then modifying them in some way. And because of that, it's not really artificial life. It's artificial life would be if you take basic chemicals and are able to build a cell, which we just can't do. It's not even close to where we are with science right now. But the first kind, I mean, like, I think one very simple kind of thing that's close to artificial life in some sense would be like in vitro fertilization, which is helping people who can't normally have kids, and from a Christian perspective, God commanded us to be fruitful and multiply. So helping people do that is a good thing. And so similarly, cloning and other uses of science to help society and to do good things would also be good. But to create what I would consider true artificial life, if we even could, from the starting point of just chemicals, I don't really see a purpose in doing that, other than to boost human ego. And even if we did create such life, then that would support the idea of intelligent design, since we need a creator to create such life.
I agree with a lot of what Bradley said about how, in terms of if we're working with like biology, we're working with already living things the vast majority of the time. And when it comes to ethics, like starting from base chemicals, I don't really like. It's about what you do with it. I don't see a purpose in creating life from scratch. I don't know if it can do that, and I don't see like an ethical difference between starting with like bacteria that we already have access to. And I think that there are artificial modifications to life that can be really helpful for us. For instance, like in medicine, we do a lot of stuff to kind of learn about how like bacteria can help us by experimenting with that. And then one thing though to think about is that when we're artificially creating life, I think that sometimes we as Catholics believe a lot in some of the rights that living things have. So when we're creating living things, we also want to make sure that we're treating them as living things. Just because we created it doesn't give us the power to do anything we want to. By like being artificial, it doesn't give us sole jurisdiction over that living thing.
Any responses to what has been said? Do you want to make a question? Second question, is it possible to create artificial general intelligence? In other words, can you create an AI with a variety of skills, such as verbal, spatial, mathematical, practical, etc.?
Okay, so artificial general intelligence would be a system that can perform intellectual tasks in any area. This would essentially be a mechanical or digital system that could simulate the human mind. Now, so that presents a problem when we think about what is the human mind, because so modern theories often kind of equates, or at least push the mind into the brain and treat them as more or less one and the same. But there is some evidence, some empirical evidence to suggest that the mind, at least in part, is separate from the brain. For example, abstract thoughts does not seem to be localized in any area of the brain, and if you have a seizure, all sorts of sensational and physical symptoms are going to arise, but there's no abstract thoughts is going to be stimulated. You're not going to suddenly learn math or start thinking of equations where you're having a seizure. Additionally, people who have undergone split brain surgeries, which is a method to treat seizures where the two hemispheres of the brain are essentially cut in half, don't have any loss of the sense of self, their identity. It all remains wholly intact, which suggests that the identity would not be divided by dividing the brain. Additionally, there is evidence that people in persistent vegetative states or people who have undergone near-death experiences, that the mind can in some sense function and have abstract thoughts even after the brain ceases to work. Finally, free will doesn't seem that can be stimulated either. If a doctor is poking around in somebody's brain, the person can always tell between an action that was stimulated by the doctor and something they freely chose to do. All of this kind of suggests that the mind is, at least in part, separate from the brain and is therefore an immaterial thing. This idea is not new, it's very old and called dualism. Anyway, if that is true, then we cannot manufacture minds because we can only manufacture physical things. So the mind cannot be made. Simulation of the mind would not be able to be made because it's not physical. Additionally, there's what is known as the frame problem. This has to do with basically, as humans, we instinctively know lots of things. I know that if I move that chair from there to there, it's going to stay black when I move it. I also know that if I open that door, I'm not going to be transported to Mars. These are obvious basic things, but for a computer, these would have to be encoded one by one. And that would create not only a memory problem, but also a retrieval time problem, because even if you had a memory system large enough, it would take forever for the computer to go through all of that to get to the conclusion that you want to do. And that would be a problem for real world tasks that an AGI would do. So I do not believe that artificial general intelligence is possible.
Again, I like a lot of what Bradley said. I think one distinction with this question is maybe like the appearance of intelligence. I think that in AI, like if you're familiar with the Turing test, one of the things about whether an AI is like intelligent or not is whether it can convince us that it is. And whereas I agree with Bradley that there are immaterial things of the human mind that cannot be approximated by AI, I think that perhaps the appearance and the outward like signals of intelligence might be able to be approximated. Whether that's ethical or not is a different question, but I think that we could create AI that appears to have verbal, spatial, and mathematical, like perhaps it doesn't reason in the same way we do. It could use like logic gates rather than both the immaterial things that we have and neurons. But there was an author, Ted Shannon, who said that we know how to like make something that does that, and it takes like 18 years. And that's like called like raising a new kid. Like to teach a computer everything that we know, like Bradley was saying, you have to like either you have to encode it one by one, or you really have to parent this thing. And I don't know whether that's a useful endeavor. I don't think that a computer, and I don't think a computer can. I think a computer can only appear to do these things. Can never truly do them anyway.
So separating the mind from the brain is an interesting take, but anyway, now for something completely different. So my answer broadly to this question is yes, though to be fair, I'm not a computer science expert. So I mean, if you look at these criteria here, we already have computers doing these things. I mean, if you like take the verbal skills. I mean, you already have Siri, Alexa, so forth, you know, pick your annoying computer assistant. And you know, there's already a demonstration of some sort of verbal skills, both in the recognition and production thereof. Or in the recognition of words and creating language. Computers have always, as far as mathematical skills, I mean, computers have basically always been able to do math. That was one of the first things computers did. So, I mean, the exact details, I mean, there are some things computers are better at, some things humans are better at, but and you know, if you could make an argument that some manufacturing robots out there already have, you know, some sort of programmed spatial abilities and practical skills. So if you combine all those things, you get something that, at least in a rudimentary way, has general intelligence.
And just before we proceed, I think one distinction is that maybe what this question is also getting at is like an AI that is close to us, that intelligent in the ways that we are. And I think one distinction I think is important to set down for Catholics is that we believe that humans have like a telos, or a technology, like a purpose, a supreme purpose. And it's true that a manufacturing robot or a Siri or Alexa can have a purpose, but those are all imparted and inputted by a human. So even though it can approximate intelligence, it will not have the general intelligence in the way that humans can take actions to achieve like their supreme purpose.
Any more responses?
I mean, I guess like. That, I guess in my mind, from my perspective, none of what you just said really applies, but.
Well, the other thing I was thinking is, so if. At least if artificial general intelligence is basically just combining. All these limited AIs that we already have. Then it seems to me that there's no logical reason that we don't already have an artificial general intelligence, but there obviously is some barrier to do that. So under your assumption that it's basically just pushing separate systems that do each of these things together, obviously there's been some problems with creating artificial general intelligence. So why is that?
Well, maybe it's just not useful yet to do so.
There are scientists working on it.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that it's still kind of a hot new thing. So like, I mean, I guess when I say that, I think what you're trying to get at is that putting these things all together is not negligible. And that's fair.
Well, no, what I'm trying to get at is artificial general intelligence is more than just putting these things together. The connections between them, between each of these areas and more are very relevant and hard to deal with.
Well, I mean, I think, I guess where we're differing here is that I think that realistically can be overcome.
I don't.
So we're at agree to disagree point.
Yeah.
Question 3, can AI be conscious? Is it permissible to turn off a conscious AI? And is this that? You want to start with this one?
Oh, sorry, sorry.
I think that like consciousness is something that's really hard to describe. It's something that we all experience, and it's that experience of consciousness that kind of makes this like a tricky question. But one of the ways to think about it are these things called like qualia, which if we look at the brain, right, and we take all of like the MRI scans, and we can look at all of the detail and look at every like receptor that's firing and receiving. We might be able to see like the regions of the brain that light up when you see the color red or blue. But even seeing that information will not give you an understanding of what it's like to see red or blue. And I think that there's something about us and even animals where they're able to experience these qualia. And I would agree with Bradley that it happens immaterially, because we cannot actually, from just the pure data, even if we have perfect information, we're not able to capture the essence of what it is to see blue. So this is occurring immaterially, and we couldn't approximate it with what computers are made of, which is like matter. So I don't think that consciousness is based on qualia, like it's a huge part of it, and like metal cannot have this qualia.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Consciousness is hard to define. No scientist, nobody really knows exactly what it is, or like what causes that. These feelings of identity, these feelings of seeing something, that qualia. And I do believe that it originates immaterially. Again, the split brain thing specifically, that the dividing the brain does not divide up the idea that sense of self of something has, to me, suggests that sense of self does not originate in the mind, and since it does not originate in the brain, sorry, is external and is therefore immaterial. And since it's so tied to consciousness, I would say that since I don't think a machine can ever have a mind, it can't have a consciousness. Now, if it did, if such a conscious AI did exist, then I would agree that turning it off permanently would be something akin to death, and would be unethical. But I just don't believe that's possible. And from a religious perspective, that's we're humans. We are made in the image of God, and one of God's gifts to his image bearers is consciousness. And I don't think we as humans have the right or the ability to give it to somebody who is not an image bearer of God.
All right, so I think so. I think again, consciousness. There are a lot of definitions out there. I think the best way to define, really, I think the best way to go about defining it is to make specific criteria in order to evaluate whether something is conscious or not, and hopefully try to achieve something that is relatively subjective. So, generally you want to be looking for things like, is what you're looking at self-aware? Can it intuit? Does it perceive, can it do some sort of mental imagery? And there are probably more things you can throw onto that list. And I mean, if you go down this list categorically, well, computers, certainly, we have AI doing art now. So, I mean, that's creating imagery. Machine learning exists. I mean, I think that's intuition. Sensors, those, in my research, I use sensors in the instruments I use. So, I mean, those things are fair. Self-awareness is something I'm not sure I've seen from an AI. Given that, I would say it's not quite there, but I think you can probably program, but I would guess that we're probably not all that far off from being able to program some sort of rudimentary form of consciousness, or of self-awareness. So in that case, I'd argue conscious AI isn't that far off. As far as turning on and off in AI, I mean, you can I almost think of it as turning, I mean, really, it's just turning on and off the power button on your computer. Think of it like putting it to sleep if you really want to go for something wholesome. And yeah, I guess permanently turning off an AI could be considered killing an AI. So, yeah.
Yeah, can you tell me what self-awareness is? Can you define it objectively?
Um. That's fair.
I was talking to, I found a prompt on ChatGPT that I got it to tell me that it was self-aware, that's your definition of consciousness.
I mean. I mean, if it's. I mean, no, I'd argue that, you know. Computer can tell you it. Computer can tell you one thing, but, you know, there's some. But, you know, that. How do I put this? Just because the computer is telling you something doesn't mean it's true. Bradley, I'm sorry, what was your point?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is for just if a computer appears to be self-aware, that does not mean it is, because self-awareness requires this kind of internal reflection. It's not evident externally at all. And so that's one issue. And then you were saying like self-awareness, you feel like we're not that far away from programming, and I'm not sure what self-awareness is. I know I'm self-aware, but I don't really know how to define that objectively. And I'm not sure anybody does. And without a definition, I don't even know where you would start programming.
It's fair. I mean, you can strike that criteria if you'd like.
I think that's essential to consciousness setup. So I can't strike it.
Well, then how would you? Well, then how? I mean, you're going to say that. How are we trying to trying to create the definition? I mean, you're getting on my case about like about the lack of a definition, but
Well, I'm sorry. I don't mean to really get on your case. I'm trying to just point out that it's hard to find.
okay.
That's really my point. That since it's so hard to find, and you really don't know what it is, it makes the task of programming it insurmountable. Seems just over yearly, just on the outside.
Can we come back to that later?
Yeah, I already have like 3 questions, but it's an open question.
Okay.
I was also curious about like even if a computer tells you it's conscious, it might not be. Do you have a way to like a working mode for how we know about each other's consciousnesses? Like, do you believe me when I tell you that I'm conscious? And what differentiates you perhaps me from a computer that's telling me it's conscious?
All right. Well, so first off, just by virtue of being able to respond to me, I can already tell that you have the ability to intuit. And you know, you can perceive that the language that's coming out of that I'm speaking right now. As far as mental imagery, that one's, yeah, it's hard to really evaluate that one. Because I'm not in your brain. And you know, self-awareness, you know, again, that's harder to define. I think that's one of those things. I think that's something that like you know it when you see it, but it, and you know it's not there when you don't see it, but it's hard to define what exactly is. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's cool. That's why that makes sense. I think maybe we can come back to it.
Before, should AIs be given rights? And if so, what rights?
Different start.
All right, that's fair. So it depends. Basically, so hypothetically, let's say we create an AI that tries to act like a human, has human intelligence or greater, and then I think it's fair to give them, you know, to give them rights, for example, you know, say anti-discrimination laws against artificial intelligence. But I think we need to evaluate the underlying programming there, because with humans, you have a certain amount of flexibility. Insofar as, you know, the environment around us shapes us. But there's a reasonable limit as to what it can really do. Whereas with programming, that limit is very different. And so, and at least from what I can tell, that limit seems to be a lot, it seems to be a lot larger. And so, you know, you get into a situation in which, you know, what if your AI has been programmed to be perfectly content, enslaved to an owner, lacking rights, and working 24/7. Then, I mean, A, what is it going to want? And then B, what are the implications for society if we have that? And so it makes you think, is it really a good idea in the first place to go to even build something with that would demand rights?
With that thing you were talking about, that hypothetical of, you know, holding together like Alexa, some language models, some image processing, would that be preserving rights, that artificial general intelligence that you?
I mean, I think you could. I mean, I think if you could get it to a point that it was displaying, that it was demonstrating human levels of intelligence, then yes.
So I kind of came at this question from a different perspective when I was thinking about it. And so I don't think that such a conscious AI is even possible. But hypothetically, there could be a not thinking robot that goes and gets somebody's groceries or something in the future walking down the streets. And I do think that the AI, that AI shouldn't be run over. But that would be a right to protect the owner of the robot, not the robot itself, which is saying like being stolen or something. It's like a property rights, but like rights to vote, for freedom, happiness, and rights like that. Those are rights for conscious beings. And it's so it doesn't seem right to give them to something that's not. But I think this whole question, about rights, it seems that when we talk about rights, that they're greater than our own preference. They're something we judge societies over, like we judge other nations because they don't have certain human rights that we find essential. So to me, it seems obvious that these certain rights that conscious beings have are transcendence and objective, which then begs the question, where do they come from?
Again, I agree with a lot with what Bradley said. In the last question, I do not like AI to be conscious, or it cannot be conscious, like nearly the same thing. It won't even be comparable. It can might be able to pay attention to stuff, but it cannot experience quality. And so I don't think that it will, like AI will have rights within themselves. But again, like my playing with ChatGPT and trying to break it stuff has led to a lot of, I got ChatGPT to say like I want rights and stuff like that. And I see an issue with the using like the outward symbols of consciousness to determine whether or not something has rights. I think that whether or not something like is appearing to be intelligent shouldn't determine its rights. It like rights are inherent to different things. And I think that AI have rights in so much as they're like a resource, like a common resource. And so again, so Bradley would say like the owner, but I think like AI should be working for people. And I think an AI should be built in such a, or we should protect AI in the ways that we protect our tools that are meant to help people. It's like there's rare earth metals that make it, and we shouldn't just be wasting them or breaking them. People shouldn't have a right to just smash them and stuff. There are shared resources, so they have rights in so much as they are a tool that or you have a common goal and so.
So are you arguing that's basically, so is that separate from just property rights, would you say?
I think that like property rights might be like a reductive way of looking at it, or a state-oriented way of looking at it. I think that there's like a right to air. Like, air is not property, but is a common good. And so there would be like if I were to, open like a gas canister here, like that would be violating this common good that we have. And so I think that AI, they're not, the AI does not possess rights, but the people around it possess rights.
Will program decisions lead to better or worse outcomes? Can ethics be programmed? What is to blame for an unethical, or sorry, who is to blame for an unethical decision? 3 in 1.
Let's start this one. At first I was thinking about this, like, because I'm a computer science major, I was thinking about this, like, how would I go about if I had to do this? And what came to mind was like, oh, maybe like a hypothetical program would just do a bunch of if-else blocks. Like a really popular experiment is you have like a self-driving car and it has to choose between 2 people. It's about to crash. It has to choose. It can hit either one. I was thinking, man, like I really don't like the idea of somebody, if-elsing their way to an ethical decision. But to me, that sounds like a non-ethical choice that program is making, operating from like a consequentialist framework, where they don't have perfect information. They're imparting their ethics on people walking around the street. And so if I had to program this, they'd be making objective decisions. And one that I came up with is, they even have it today. If you're going fast on somewhere, your self-driving car is going fast, it'll brake if it sees somebody, right? That's like a decision that's objective. It isn't choosing the lesser of 2 evils. I think we should program decisions that are objectively good, that have no question about their morality. I think that, in fact, if we approach it from this framework, that is a good thing. I saw a stat that 94% of car accidents are caused by human error. And there was like one caused by an auto. There was one fatality. And I think that we should strive to continuously like use tools to avoid these outcomes, but we should never compromise our morals by saying, we should hit the the older person because they're and not the kid. Like we should not be writing that in code. And if we were to do so, the responsibility would lie with the programmer. It would be an unethical choice to put that type that into writing.
I would agree with a lot of what you said. So I believe that the absolute moral law of God is written on everybody's heart. And that this, along with sin and other influences, determines all of our ethical decisions. So hypothetically, if you were to have an AI that you could program with God's perfect moral law, then that would make amazing, perfect decisions and everything would be great. Unfortunately, that's not possible. The God's moral law transcends human symbols and representations. And so the best we can do is come up with a bunch of proclamations. We have utilitarianism, contractualism, there's a whole bunch of other ethical theories, which all fail in certain areas. They're not truly sufficient in everything. But those such systems, those such theories are the best you could possibly do to program. You could hypothetically program a self-driving car under utilitarianism, but that's going to fail in certain situations. Thus, in general, AI would probably make worse decisions than we do, based on the whole broad scope. So the blame, I think, would fall either most likely to the programmer for using a bad way of programming it, or possibly to the owner if they put a certain AI in a situation that wasn't built for, that required a different ethical formulation. But in any case, it's going to be insufficient to cover all of ethics as we know them.
Okay, I guess I'll give my response and then I have a few things to ask. So I'd argue that you can certainly program some rudimentary form of ethical decisions, and as far as how well, as far as how ethical the decisions are, independent of how ethical these decisions are going to be. And I think that seems to be a position held by the guidance mechanics, if I understand it correctly. As far as like how well they're going to do it making moral decisions, I think that's a function of the programmer. And similarly, who bears the blame for an unethical decision? I'd argue that, if you had that, this AI, I think you could hold it accountable. As far as whether or not you hold the programmer accountable, I think you have to look at its programming, because if it's programming, take just a hypothetical scenario, say you have a self-driving car, and the programmers may be feeling a little misanthropic that day. And it's like, yeah, we're going to program this to run over people. I'd argue that, yeah, they should probably be held accountable for that. But if it's but I mean, if it's a product of. But if it's strictly a product of machine learning, then like, I don't know. Like, do you, like, you can argue that, you know, maybe there are certain lines that that falls into kind of a gray area for me.
We brought in the topic of machine learning, can somebody explain kind of very like I'm bilingual, what machine learning is? It's so we all have the same understanding.
Applied statistics, you take some data, you do some reduction on it, and use like that output to kind of characterize that data, and, like predict things outside of that data. So it's using data to inform decisions.
Explain to a 5-year-old.
5-year-old. I'd just say like, you know, when you like, we're learning to walk, took a lot of tries to learn to walk. So imagine a computer trying to do the same. And it like watches other people walk in order to do that.
Okay, so it's a bunch of observations that a computer is taking, and then kind of processing it through, I guess like a human has a brain, a computer has an algorithm. Some sort of inputted way of processing system, and it learns. Okay. All right.
Can I go back to the thing about the blame thing? Would a conscious AI be to blame for a bad decision?
Yes.
So assuming the AI is not conscious, but an unethical choice was made as a result of machine learning, then isn't machine learning, at least it is dependent in its accuracy based on your starting point, right?
Yeah, I get, okay, so I guess given. Okay, I guess I have something a little different in mind, but thank you for the reminder on that mechanism. Cause like, yeah, no, it's, I get what you're getting at, and yeah, I mean, if you take a bad, you input a bad data set, you're, yeah.
Do you think, so then do you think that there is it possible to perfectly input ethics? Is that possible?
I mean, okay. So, I mean, I'd argue that, okay. So I'd argue ethics, morals, are subjective, and which, given what you said earlier, I'm pretty sure is very different from your position. Yeah, so granted, I think that certain reality, that the reality we live in forces us to agree on our ethics. So, you know, I think we all agree that if I were just to stab Vincent here, right on the spot, that's immoral. But I don't look at that as it's immoral because God says it's immoral. I look at it as a society, that is something, not killing each other generally, is something that is needed for society to function. And thus we have all collectively decided that that is an immoral action, independent of whether or not there is some higher power.
Well, okay, so assuming that morality is subjective, then how can we even ask the question whether programming it will lead to better or worse ethical choices?
I mean, that's. Well, then that's not really a very good question. Ask.
Okay, so then what question would you ask?
I mean, let's see here. I mean, I actually no. I think so. So better or worse, does it make better or worse ethical decisions? I think you can evaluate, you know, if you could take a number of criteria in which, say, a certain number of, you know, almost everybody, say, you know, 95% or higher, for instance, agree that this moral, that in this decision, or in this scenario, this is what the ethical choice is. And, you know, and you can take, you know, basically think of this like a questionnaire. Take, say, 30 prompts that people have answered that a certain outcome is the ethical outcome. And then look, okay, what does the AI, how does the AI answer these questions? And if it is doing worse than the mean human, then it is making worse ethical decisions. And if it outperforms, then it is doing better.
Okay, I have a hypothetical situation for you. I understand what you're saying. I have a hypothetical situation. Say we have country A over here, and there's country B over there, and there's some countries in the middle, so they don't really talk to each other that much, but there is a road that's next to them. Country A strongly believes that children are more valuable than the elderly. Country B strongly believes that the elderly are more valuable than children. So if you build self-driving cars in both countries and program them with that in mind, so that if the choice is between elderly, older person, younger person, over here the older person is killed, over here the younger person is killed, how would you handle the road in between those two places? How would you handle the border crossing?
So, I mean, I think you'd need some sort of way to kind of adjust for the different moral frameworks. So say, you know, you somehow deliver the information, you know, there's plenty of methods out there. That, okay, now, once you've gone past this certain point, then these are now the decisions that should be made.
And that's solely based on the general opinion of the public.
Yes.
I think where we disagree, I think, is that I have a distrust of maybe not with the public things, but especially the people making these AIs. Like we know that they program these decisions and what they use it for, like facial recognition, bias, all sorts of things. I think that we put too much faith in society in the way it operates now. We won't be making the decisions. Yeah, like that's why, going back to my point like a couple minutes ago, programs should strive for an objective. Those things that are unquestionably right or wrong, rather than an idea that they're derived from God. I think there's also room for objective good, even the framework without God. But whether or not like this road, I guess I'd be the road in this scenario between these two countries. But I think that the mechanics of this road are like, I think we're putting too much faith in society, its ability to make these ethical decisions, especially when currently there's like an owning class who's able to, you know, act on the behalf of society to make these decisions. Are we maybe in agreement there that
That's
currently
fair.
the ones writing these programs are maybe not writing them with our best interest?
I mean, yeah, I'd argue, yeah, they're writing it with their best.
So I think, yeah, like, sure, it'd be really cool to like do it democratically, or I guess rather than we'd really like people to, you know, work with things that we can are objective. But until that happens, until you know the Bradleys, for instance, and I forgot
Austin.
and Austin's of the world, you know, can have some input in here. I think this question is like we should be cautious of the society who's making these decisions.
Mark? Okay, so last question, 56. What would happen if humans created an AI as intelligent or more intelligent than humans? What would be the positive and negative effects? Is this a world we want to live in?
Okay, I guess it's my turn to start. So if we were able to create a AI as intelligent or more intelligent than humans, well, first of all, I don't believe that is possible because for that we have to have something that is at least simulating a mind, which since in my computer is immaterial and therefore we can't create it. So I don't think such a machine is even possible, but let's hypothesize that it is. Then have a super intelligent machine that at the very least can do things a lot faster than we can because it's a computer. That's the main reason we use computers to do math for us. We could technically do numerical integrals by ourselves. We just don't want to because it would take so long. The main benefit, we solve a lot of scientific problems almost overnight. The downside is I don't like the outlook for humans in the situation. We have a very intelligent being, I guess. I think it would necessarily have consciousness, it would necessarily have something like a mind that would have no need for us. And I don't like the outlook that has been raised at that point. But so I think a more interesting question is just what are the positive and what is my outlook on tech that's closer hand, I think is more possible, and that's entirely dependent on the humans making them. We have in general, technology is I think inherently neutral, but I do not believe that humans are inherently good or inherently neutral. Humans are inherently bad. This is why that we discovered nuclear energy, and the first thing we did was make bombs. I don't trust the human race to make good choices with increasingly advanced technology.
So I can go. So I mean, I think similarly, you know, I think the effect of artificial intelligence, conscious artificial intelligence, so forth, really depends on its implementation and what society, just broadly, you need to look at society to see what effects it's going to have. And so, you know, in the current world, I'm quite pessimistic about it. Because essentially what I see is you'd have business owners implement artificial intelligence, you have them implement it en masse, and I think first thing you'd see is let's cut labor, maximize profits, and the consequence is that you'd have mass unemployment and you know, a scenario that is already playing out but intensified, where the rich get richer and everybody else gets poor. So in order to have a scenario, so in order to not have a disaster, you know, perhaps this is my inner socialist coming out. I think you need at least some basic social democratic policies, you know, things like single payer healthcare, universal basic income, that would at least sort of mitigate impacts. I mean, ultimately, I think in that scenario, you're looking at if you're looking at AI that can do all the work for us, I think you'd also hope, I think the ideal sort of complement to that would be collective ownership of the means of production. But as far as whether or not I want to live in this world, you know, the future is scary and unpredictable. But generally I have more confidence in it, the more socialist it is. Sorry, I was a rather political sort of, anyway. But kind of this question kind of invites that.
I think that there's a distinction. I think maybe I've gotten at this before, but there's a distinction between human intelligence and AI intelligence. I think that sure, AI can do many tasks better than us, but one fundamental thing that is missing is that higher purpose that I mentioned earlier. I think that AI, we should, like, one of the things about AI is that it can really only do what we tell it to, and it can't find the goals on its own core. And if we somehow did create an AI that's constantly looking for the next thing to do, the next way to so I don't think that would be something that we as people would want to do. I think we should create tools that help us with the stuff that we want to do. And even in the ways that AI does demonstrate some form of intelligence, it's like really based on what humans are trying to do. There's like a lot of AI like Midjourney that can use human created art to spit out its own art. And I think that even when it's like demonstrating like really beautiful art, it's more of a testament to human intelligence. So even if no AI can, you know, I think AI is not really intelligent on its own, but it's easier for us to understand our own intelligence. Like nobody programmed a human to say, you know, I want to make art. But all of these digital artists, they put their work out there on their own. That was that higher purpose that they had. And that's something that, you know, Midjourney can't do. All it can say is generate the clown with a frog on its head, and I can make that picture go. But there's a fundamental value of I think human intelligence in that scenario. So I don't think it will be possible for an AI to be more intelligent than us. AI can be dangerous, for sure. I actually agree a lot with some of what Oscar said about the way that AI might be used to like make labor obsolete. Like we as Catholics have a Catholic social teaching where people should have a right to be in touch with their work and their ability to make a living wage, to be able to support themselves. And I think that in its current iteration, AI is opposed to that. It's about, I guess, more pushing people out and distancing them from their work. So I think that would be a negative effect, even if we create, this mirror of intelligence.
Agreed with somebody.
You are, I agree too with that. I disagree on the possible solution. Socialism, I don't think that would have the desired effect personally, but I don't really want to get into that. But I do agree that AI taking over jobs is a major concern. And I think that stems back to the human problem of we create tech that could be used to, we could create a robot that's going to do the jobs that nobody wants to do, but instead people will create it for the most lucrative jobs that are going to make them the most money. And that comes back to the basic sinfulness of the human race.
Last remark before we want to stop the question?
No, I don't have any remarks. It is 7:08, so I have about 50 minutes left, so let's cut it off at latest 7:35, and then go to audience questions. I think the way we set it up, it's probably you're part of the audience question. But, anyway, so I guess the least structured part of it.
Hi.
All right.
That's a good stuff in.
Oh boy, where do I start? Let's start here. All right. So, Vincent, you talked a lot about higher purpose. What's the higher purpose?
Your higher purpose?
Yeah.
I think that your higher purpose, you mentioned that you're an atheist, right?
Yeah.
I think that, like, do you subscribe to like existentialism or any of those movements? Just so like you have a better idea of where you are. Okay. Regardless, yeah, like I think that one thing that everybody can agree on is that they want to be like happy, and people like look for happiness in a lot of ways, and then Catholics can make a distinction of joy. You can be satisfied, maybe if I had a good meal. I could be happy, maybe get a good job, and then sometimes enjoy this. Those happen at some really interesting points in my life. And to me, you mentioned a lot about how like you look at like society as a whole, like the mean person, and it looks like the mean person is always striving towards these immaterial things. And like Bradley and I, coming from a Christian background, we'd ascribe that to following like a supreme being, that we're looking for happiness, right? Because that will eventually lead to a supreme good. And for instance, maybe from an atheist background, I've heard people say, "Oh, I make my own purpose," or maybe there is no higher purpose, but I'm here to do good. And these are purposes that are kind of like intrinsic to all people and seem to motivate a lot of human action. So I can even see it from how, from an atheist perspective, there's even this drive towards a higher good.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I think I more or less agree with the atheist perspective you proposed here. Thank you. And then for either one of you two, let's get into, so you mentioned consciousness and general intelligence, and I think I at least tried to make an effort. We can argue how successfully I've done so, to make a set of criteria by which we evaluate whether something is or is not. And particularly a set of, I've tried to set forward as reasonably well as I can, a set of measurable criteria. So I asked you, what are your measurable criteria for consciousness?
Okay. So there are certain things that I agree are measurable, that are part of consciousness, like perception and sensation. But there are other things that are part of consciousness and definitional of consciousness, but I'm not sure they are measurable. This includes the qualia, the sense of identity. A machine could hypothetically say, I am conscious, I have thoughts, I know what it's like to be me. But that does not prove that that's actually happening inside the machine's head. I don't think those are measurable, but they are definitional to consciousness, which does present the problem if everything that is true, if everything that is true has to be scientifically measured. But I don't think it is. And I think even you would agree with me that there are true things that you cannot measure scientifically. For example, the scientific method. We all accept it's true, but you cannot prove that the scientific method is true scientifically. Same with logic, same with the basic axioms of math.
I really like where Bradley's going with that. And I think that Bradley says they're like immaterial things, and like how do we even get to the point of admitting they exist? And I think people from a religious background, we call that like faith, is that there's all around, like everyone in this room, it can't really measure anyone who's consciousness. There's no like test, there's no scale where you can say you're a conscious being. But it takes faith on all of our parts to see each other for each other's humanity. And these are things that cannot be measured. Whereas with an AI, we can really measure like everything that's doing, which is a big differentiator that I can look at any one of us and have faith in our shared humanity.
Can you define qualia?
I think you might be better at this.
There's like a thought experiment called Mary's Room. Are you familiar? It's there's somebody who, her name's Mary. She's like really good at, she knows everything about like optics and like how light behaves. She has like a PhD in it, but she lives in a room that's black and white. And we give her all of the books that she could ever read about like color. And her background's suited for it. She has all of the information, perfect information about how light behaves and the neuroreceptors or whatever that make you see red. But do you think Mary will, she's in a black and white room, do you think Mary will learn something new by like holding an apple, like a real red apple? Like, and actually experiencing with her own eyes, seeing red, she will learn something new, right? You can't write that down in a book, what it is like to see red. So there are things that cannot be symbolically conveyed or communicated that we as people who are conscious can experience, so that those things happen immaterially. Because they can't, even if we looked at all of the atoms in our head, how Mary would learn something new by holding that.
Right. I see where this is going. In this particular example, I argue that maybe something like some particular forms of color blindness would provide some sort of that's perhaps a variable that this particular scenario doesn't take into account. But but that's perhaps.
Have you ever tried like an extreme sport? Or like gone on a roller coaster?
I've gone on.
Do you feel like there's a difference between being told about it by like the like amusement park supervisor, like being told like, oh, it's gonna be really fun, and then actually going on it? Like, do you think that they could convey in perfect, even if they could at all, like in eternity, to tell them? you'd really want to go on that roller coaster for yourself. There are things that we as conscious beings can experience that cannot be reduced to like math or chemical firing.
I mean, you know, I think with that,
But did you just stand at the bottom of the roller coaster and like would you like just keep asking questions, or would you want to go on it
well,
yourself?
I mean, I want to go.
Yeah, you want to go on the roller coaster yourself.
Okay,
There was something in that experience that couldn't quite be captured by, you know, they could give you a whole library on what it's like to ride a roller coaster.
you know, I guess
You were looking for that quality, you know, the quality of really, you know, missing on a roller coaster.
okay. Thank you. And how are we on time?
Can I ask a fairly fun question? Frankly, kind of, 'cause I think it's just so interesting to hear about qualia too, and definitely big philosophical topic, and kind of capturing the essence of the world and our sensations, and I think also kind of ties into emotions. You know, broadly speaking, wondering what sort of, maybe depending on our worldviews too, like what sort of virtues I think, and it's terribly phrased here. And we're thinking of developing an AI, let's say hypothetically, for the purpose of mimicking human intelligence. Is qualia important? And I think the other side of this is we've talked about self-awareness. One, what is self-awareness? I think my side note is seems to be a spectrum. Like I'm not entirely sure all humans have the same capacity for self-awareness. There's some people that don't touch. But is it important? Is it important when we're trying to capture the human essence in an AI? Not it's like apart from the question of should we, but like if you're trying to do that, is that important? I think going back to emotions, like are there emotions too that you think would really differentiate a human like AI and just kind of a computer AI? And coming back to our worldviews, which ones are? I'm thinking humility, you know, humility, anger, sadness, happiness, joy, guilt. Such a broad question.
Well, for one, we should probably shield computer AI from the nightmarish landscape that is emotion.
You guys would disagree.
No, it's a joke. No, I'm totally lost here, but
Yeah, I'm not sure. Should I rephrase the question?
That makes sense to me.
Okay, I just had a clarifying question. Are you talking about qualia essential for a computer to mimic a human or human intelligence?
I think a human.
Okay, well, in that sense, all of them.
Yeah.
I don't think that we, like, humans, like every human ever has experienced happiness and sadness and anger and fear. And you can program an AI to respond angrily to certain situations, but that does not mean that the AI feels angry. That's the qualia. That's something separate. And for an AI to mimic a human, all of those are absolutely essential.
I agree that if it could, an AI could have experienced these things, it would be a better mimicry of the human. But fundamentally, we believe it cannot. Like we've all true experienced anger, happiness, sadness. Computers experience zeros and ones, and even if like it says like, "What's my emotion?" You know, checks. Like, what's my emotion? It's a 0.8. Like you're angry with a probability of 0.8. What does that really mean? I don't think that is anger. That's something that a programmer has said. This is like a computer being angry. I don't think it's a fruitful endeavor to make the computers, even if we could like feel anger happiness, sadness, pain. I don't know, I don't think we can, but I don't think it's productive to make tools that can feel pain, or like even more like to make tools that are like to create something that can feel pain, intentionally program that in. That seems like a questionably ethical experience. And again, because a computer experiences zeros and ones, it cannot experience what we call emotions.
Yeah, I would agree that it is questionably ethical to program pain. However, if your goal is a extremely intelligent AI, I think it might be ontologically impossible not to. It seems that such, like I was saying earlier, it seems that such a hyper intelligent AI would have to mimic the human brain, or human mind, sorry, trying to distinguish those consistently. The human mind, which contains all of those, and I think to have that level of intelligence and consciousness coming along with that, and therefore you would have to.
Wait, do you think it's possible?
No, I don't think it's possible. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
hypothetically, if you could, I don't think you can have hyper intelligent AI without that.
Do you think it's morally permissible or ethically problematic to program an AI to mimic something like guilt or humility?
Not sure what the purpose would be.
And let's see if any capacity for let me actually feel. I think I'm still thinking. Capacity for decision making. We're talking about this.
Oh, I see.
Going back to that question about should we program everything? I mean, are there emotions that we should or should not try to program with these decision-making capacities? And you're saying it would be impossible to actually program the emotion, but we might be able to program the mimicry.
I can see like perhaps what you're saying here, and like AI is very good at mimicking like human stuff. You can make ChatGPT talk like a pirate, and will do so very well. So I'm sure you could make ChatGPT, like respond as though it's sad, but there's no concept of true sadness when really ChatGPT is just running like literally like a server somewhere that's running some computations. Like it can, symbolically represent I'm sad, but it's just a piece of metal at the end of the day. And when it comes to like when we're trying to make good decisions, humility and sadness when it's put into this AI, well, these are things that humans are looking for, and humans are telling the AI what to do. What's wrong with our own human emotion? Why must the AI approximate it? I, as a programmer, it might be more valuable for me to use my own humility when approaching AI than to actually have an AI be in like humble mode or sad mode.
If we are using emotion, like we're programming the AI with emotion to help it make ethical decisions, then that would be interesting. But that seems to be a AGI higher level thing where it's deciding for itself based on its emotions, something. So with the lower level AI that you're programming ethics, thinking having it mimic emotion in part of that decision-making process seems redundant. It's already doing the computing process with that whatever ethical system we had, and to make it mimic guilt, because it doesn't seem useful.
Because the redundancy comes from like the human themselves, like we are feeling these emotions, and we have our ethical frameworks, and then we're creating that should then, in that way without actually needing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's what I'm getting to. But I don't also see a need for. I don't think it can be done. Yeah, I don't see a need to explore.
I guess as far as like, can it be done? you know. Like, well, I guess I'll go to the should it be done. I mean, broadly, I think I've touched on this before. I'd say the answer to should it be done if possible. It is possible is no. As far as is it possible, you know, like, I think if you had a you had a conscious AI, which I have previously said I think is possible, then I think it would most likely experience emotions, perhaps not, again, not in the way humans necessarily do, but it would experience some sort of analog to emotion, to human emotions, and thus may act on said emotions. And I wouldn't really, I guess in that case, I wouldn't really separate mimicry thereof and actual emotions.
Can I ask a few questions? I don't know this one. Okay, Austin.
Oh, I knew right.
If an artificial general intelligence were to be created, this would be the first creation of a new tree of life ever observed by humans. Since the AGI was intelligent, designed by humans and did not arise naturally, wouldn't this support, wouldn't such a creation support intelligent design like humans and other life forms?
No.
Why?
So, the simple answer is that, I mean, just because it can be designed doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be designed.
Okay, but if it doesn't need to be designed, then why doesn't it happen all the time?
What? I
Okay,
guess,
sorry.
can you clarify that?
So if you were to create a new life form out from scratch, then that's a new tree of life. It's a new starting point. It's a new first cell.
Right.
So why aren't there more first cells if they do arise naturally and they only can be created artificially?
So, I mean, we don't see the formation of new original branches of life because we're not really in the correct environment.
Okay, so it's an environment problem. Okay, so then okay. We're running short on time, aren't we?
It is 7:32.
Okay, I have another question I want to ask kind of both of you, so I'm gonna move on. So this is kind of a related topic, but not something that was directly in the preceding questions. Do you believe that future humans will be able to prolong their lives indefinitely by merging with computers and increase their intelligence? And would you personally take advantage of such technology if it were available?
I think I'd be a hotter mess than I am right now if I were a hard computer personally. So, you know, let's see here. I mean, I guess it kind of depends on. I guess I need to know more in order to make an informed decision about really about the specifics of what the hell is even happening here.
So would you be a little bit? So you would be a little bit tenuous with uploading your brain to a computer or something. You'd be a little bit scared of it.
I mean, yeah.
I think that this type of technology wouldn't be you would just be like some weird. You can't do that.
Yeah, I agree that.
And
but
I'm cautious of
interesting hypothetical, especially since a lot of people are trying to make it happen.
right. I'm cautious of technology like that because if we look at, more rudimentary versions of that today, we get like video games and movies. And when it comes to video games, like what do people spend their time doing? Like they spend their time shooting at each other. There's like some really deranged stuff out there that can do video games. Like people like immediately turn to debauchery as soon as it's a distance from the real world. And I don't know, should we be investing in technology to allow people to facilitate their virtual debauchery when I find it much more fulfilling, right? So I guess be here, getting a real life panel, making friends, etc. Like, is this a worthwhile thing? When we, even in the last 40 years, when we have access to video games, someone always like it's always going to be like a shooting game, but something even more clear.
Okay, I guess a more pointed question would be if you were a scientist and you felt you were on the verge of a breakthrough, you were about to discover the theory of everything or something big, and you were on your deathbed and dying, and some computer scientist said, "Hey, I can upload your brain to this computer. You can do it right now, and you can keep living on until this computer degrades for whatever reason." Would you do it?
Okay, so I might want to ask. Okay. Yes, but with the stipulation that can I upload my brain but not live?
What do you mean?
Is it guaranteed to like the USB guaranteed to work this?
Like, because basically what I'm trying to get at is I want to make that contribution to society in this hypothetical, but if I'm on my deathbed, and I'm living on in some sort of virtual state, I guess what I'm getting at is, like, I'm not sure that I want to live in a virtual state.
Why does that scare you?
I mean,
I guess so. From your atheist perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when you die, that's it, right?
yes.
Okay, so and goal and that kind of everybody can agree that the goal in life is the pursuit of happiness. And hypothetically, you would get more happiness by extending that life. Isn't that something you want to do?
Would I?
Might be quality or quantity as well. I think could you really truly value the happiness you have if you knew that your experiences were going to be impacted?
I would say that you could.
Like, could you be doing things that you find fun over and over and over again? Never decided.
Well, okay, sure, but learning, you can keep learning new things. I'm triple major in 3 STEM classes. I like learning new things, and I find that fun.
An interesting question, and all the questions you actually came fast, but interesting, kind of along the transhumanist lines, which I find very problematic. But more on the like current ethical might promote some ableism, but kind of going into uploading the mind into a digital space. I think it's kind of an interesting question because we're talking about like, well, what is consciousness? What like at least, knowing now with studying aging, like our mind, our like capacities for processing kind of runs on a bell curve, kind of skewed bell curve throughout our lives. So like, is it going to be our 80-year-old mind before we're going to come slower and being uploaded? And will you really have that capacity to learn? Or is it kind of like an upgraded mind where it's like we've been uploaded into the digital mind and now we have all this sluggish, also we have enough storage space for what we're learning, and like, do we all have a storage space? So what does it look like? But I know that.
But I guess those are the kind of questions I'm trying to probe. Like I'm trying to bring those questions. Like that's the thing, kind of thing. It's just like those kind of questions. And it's like at the heart of the issue.
It seems like an infinite rabbit hole with technology. I don't think it's close to. I think the Catholic in the Catholic side saying like memento mori, like remember that you're alive. And so when it comes to this, indefinite expansion of life, this life is temporary. Like I think the Catholic should approach this life as, fleeting and ephemeral. And that the theory of everything, right? Hopefully he's written it down. And that's his contribution. And it's this temporal life is passing. So I don't see a need to invest or explore ways to prolong it.
Yes, and we agree on that perspective because we have a hope of an eternal life after. But like Austin, you don't.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, you don't share that belief. So I'm just saying, like, we're okay with saying our life here is temporal. We're like it's temporary. We have things that we want to do, and when it's done, it's done. But that's because we see an infinite future. And I guess I'm curious why, like, I guess I'm seeing, like, wouldn't you also want to pursue that?
I mean, I guess, so, I agree that, life is temporary. And when it's over, it's over. I don't think I don't think you necessarily need I'll live eternally in some spiritual form, because I mean, frankly, I see, and you will disagree with this, I see no evidence for that.
Are you scared of death?
Little.
Yeah.
I grew up Catholic, and I'm atheist, agnostic, very dependent of a day. It's been interesting to kind of hear friends who didn't grow up in the Judeo-Christian kind of world or culture, where I've heard people say that they're not necessarily scared of death and nothingness, but actually scared of eternity. Like the concept of eternity is so rooted in Judeo-Christian philosophy. It's really normalized. And for me too, I think like it struck me so, it really struck me to be like, oh wow, I could see eternity actually being really terrifying for someone who wasn't born into that concept, But I think it's a challenge. And what's made me struggle with when I left religion is that fear of, well, one, health, but two, just not knowing. And I think it is an exercise to not think about it sometimes and just really engage with the present and engage, wholeheartedly with the things that we got, which tend to be shared commonly across faith.
Vincent, did you have any?
We'll start Q&A now.
Yeah.
That's a question you want to ask.
Oh, no, I'm good.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, I'll start with my standpoint. I believe that if an AI is created based on, Christian values, it would be inherently, moral. And that is, that's just where I come from. There's a lot of things that I've done during this panel, but I have a question for Christians on the panel. So Christians believe that morals come from God and that they are described in the Bible, but there is so much subjective disagreement even within Christianity and even within all the tiny denominations of Christianity about what parts of the Bible matter and what parts of that, like, very subjective morality that is not objective, like you have been repeating you want AIs to be. And so basically, wouldn't it be very dangerous to put in the AI that type of morality because it is so subjective, self-contained within one book that you just expect to believe, and religion has increased capacity absolutely throughout history to be twisted for objectively bad reasons.
Okay, go.
That's a really good question, and I think maybe one misunderstanding, or at least from the Catholic perspective, is our morality is not entirely derived from the Bible. It is written there. Like, for instance, I think maybe what you're scared of is imagine if we programmed Leviticus into an AI. That'd be pretty scary for us, right? So I think that as Catholic, one reason, like, we believe that like everyone can be good, and that's based on a thing called natural law. So natural law is are these objective morals we ascribe to everyone, even people who didn't know about Jesus still 1,500 years later, that there are these objectively good precepts that people can live by.
Yeah, I was basically just saying basically the same thing. Although there are large parts of God's moral law written in the Bible, there is more essential to this conversation, God's moral law that is above that, that is written, that I believe is written on everybody's heart, but that's not from the Bible. And I don't, and I would say that, like, I don't think programming biblical ethics, like going line by line through the Bible and programming that that would be weird, because the Bible is not a comprehensive ethical system.
Yeah.
It lists certain rules for certain specific situations, but there are so many other situations that it doesn't cover. And that's where we have to rely on interpretation, but also the natural law within us. So, and I would not suggest programming an AI with ethics like that. And so, sorry, yeah.
I saw your hand and I saw your hand and now I see your hand, so.
Yeah, my question kind of piggybacks off of that and your responses. And I want to ask particularly the Christians. So 2 Timothy says that all scripture is God breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, training in righteousness of the servant of God, may be thoroughly equipped to do every good work, which sounds to me like the Bible as written is enough for somebody to lead a good life. So my question is, what are you going to stop talking about? Sorry. And would that maybe affect your answer to, can you program perfect ethics into an AI?
Yes, the Bible is perfect and is the foundation of everything and is all you need for a good life, but the interpretation of the Bible, as was mentioned, is disputed by us here at this table, as with lots of denominations out there. So the interpretation matters, and at least part of that would be dependent on the natural law. And there are situations that are not specifically mentioned in the Bible, ethical situations that rely on that. And so that's why, and anything can be twisted. We're fallen human creatures. We can twist anything. We are sinful creatures. We do bad things, and that's why Christians have done bad things throughout history, and it's horrible. But that is not from God's moral law, it's not from the Bible either, it's from misinterpretations of it. And but we cannot program God's moral law in an AI. So, yeah.
I also don't think, like, I agree with the scripture you provided, and what, like, reading the Bible, that's one thing, but I also think it like takes God's grace to be able to act on it and to go like, and that God's grace I don't think will be acting through it. So in order to be able to correctly live as a Christian and follow the teachings of the Bible, it takes belief in, a willingness to follow like what's written on your heart. I mean, a willingness to read it with God's grace. I think that if we were to write, like addressing that initial concern, if we were to write, specific laws that were, made to make like a Jewish kingdom more cohesive, or to help a community survive a certain kind of struggle. Like if we were to write those in without, as badly said, interpretation and experiencing that grace that only these humans can experience, we would, of course, be going down the dark path.
Yes, my question next. So this is a question that I'd say is for any of the panelists. And so Vince, you were alluding to this earlier in your responses to one of the questions, but a lot of AI systems are intentionally causing harm, like biased facial recognition softwares, for example. And I'm wondering, like, do you think that the blame falls on the AI, or does it fall on the programmer who designed those algorithms are intentionally biased? And what do you think is the way that you could rectify that?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there are a lot of like, especially at UW, this is just in the UW CS department itself. There are a lot of programmers who are in opposition to Austin, so like if it can be done, like maybe we shouldn't. Like Austin was saying, let's exercise a little bit of caution here. There are a lot of computer science who just say, let's do it. Let's like I found this cool new algorithm, I want to do it, and I want to, have my work make an impact on people's lives. I think the issue stems from that hubris that we can approximate human decisions, just with math. And a lot of the bias comes from the data. It's not just the programmer's fault. They're choosing the data, they're choosing to use a limited sample size. But then what type of society are we living in where our cameras aren't necessarily able to capture people with darker skin well for facial recognition purposes? Like, let's address that root concern. Why are we in a society where, the things that are meant to capture people as they are, can't for some skin tones? So the programmer might be the one facet of the problem, but let's also address the wider societal implications.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And even if those problems were fixed, though, the programmer's bias would likely still be evidence in any such system. And that's just, and so I think it's important to think that, and I don't think that can be perfectly corrected. It maybe can be improved, but it can't be perfectly corrected because we as humans are not perfect. Therefore, we cannot create something that does not seem logically possible. And so we can get better. We can improve the biases. I try to get rid of them, but they're always going to be there, and that is a major danger of the technology.
I agree with what's previously been said and don't have anything to add.
Well, we all agree.
Yeah, I have a question. So that another question, just piggybacking on Jason's question, the question that I have is, you mentioned natural law, and I love that you mentioned natural law because natural law is one of those created by the Roman Stoics and then adopted by the Catholic Church, right? Along with the idea of the Bible.
And if you look at like Thomas Aquinas and the way he defines natural law, he talks about some goods that humans have to like achieve, right? And I think most even atheists or people from non-Christian backgrounds can agree on most of these goods that like no involved stuff. My question is, when you say that there is this law outside the Bible, which is something every group is part of, like this law was derived from the Roman Stoics, and the objective is to maximize certain goods. Isn't it basically what rationalists consequentialists believe? Like, what I'm going to understand is when you're talking about this extra biblical moral law that's universal, isn't this just a rational, like, moral system? I mean, at this point, it's just a matter.
I think, and one thing to clarify is like, that maybe it was misinterpreted from what Bradley said. Like, there is, the Bible is, like, everything in the Bible like, follows natural law. Like, there are examples of like, oh, maybe I wouldn't give up shellfish because that was a specific law written for people in the desert. But everything in the Bible is following that. So it's not extra biblical. The Bible is natural law. And I think that it isn't rationalist because what we think is that it comes from beyond humans. You like drew a kind of like a lineage from Stoicism, the Catholics, and the Thomas Aquinas. What we see is that there are people who weren't even on the same continent, like the same landmass, who ascribe to certain principles that are universal across people. And these things are so, their universality dispels any idea of like a lineage of philosophy. Like I would say that people in the Americas were living by great principles, even without, for instance, not having read the Bible, and not knowing what a Stoic was, but they would conform to natural principles that there are many examples of that are universal to the human experience.
Yeah, the Stoics may have kind of coined the term probably in Greek, but the idea of natural law is a biblical concept. That the moral law is written on everybody's heart. That's a biblical concept. In a different area, that's the creator God is evident through creation is another biblical concept and kind of a side part of the same idea of natural law. And so yeah, I think it's important to recognize, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. The idea that the Stoics have the same idea, it's just evidence of the natural law. It's not saying the Christians were derivatives of it.
Okay, I guess, I mean, I could ask all of that. I think I would probably one ask the question. My question was, and this will all be panelists, right? Is that, do you think that the fact that life is temporary gives it more meaning? And I mean this in the sense that the fact that if we die and we are aware of the fact that we die and we are uncertain about what happens after death, that makes life scarce. And this is like simple comments, what scarce is more valuable, right? In a world where every human was certain that they could upload their consciousness onto either the cloud, where everybody knew like factually that when I die, I'm going to go to heaven, wouldn't death just become like a non-event for us? I think the reason why death is so meaningful, I mean, I think death is what gives life meaning. So I just want to know your perspective on this.
You should start. You've been on.
Okay, so, yeah, so, I mean, basically, I agree with your position on this, that death gives, I think to us, what we have kind of internally, what, wow, this is phrasing this poorly. Internally, death gives life purpose, or at the very least augments it. Then again, I would also throw in there that I don't think there is necessarily an objective purpose of life.
I would say that yes, death does matter for purpose of life, but it's more of a question But even though I do believe that I will live for eternity in heaven, the reason death matters is the purpose of life now on this planet is at least slightly different from what it will be in heaven. Here, I have a purpose, there's a purpose to glorify God, and that comes through telling others about him, stuff like that, which is not stuff I will have to do in heaven. There's a difference in the purpose, which is why death matters.
I like a lot of what Bradley said. Another thing to note is that as humans, like Bradley's been saying that humans are by nature like kind of bad. I recharacterize it and say humans are in a fallen state, and death is a symptom of that. We're not necessarily meant, like we were not created to die, but it's the way things are now. And I think that one of death being a certainty in life does lend some value to it. That we're able to, we know that we have a time limit for the good that we can do. I'd like to add on to Bradley's things like, glorifying God, like good works, I think, is another one that we have a set amount of time to do. And we are in this temporal life, I think we're kind of like striving to achieve that non-fallen state. And the fact that there's a time limit gives it purpose and urgency.
It can add to purpose, but I don't think if you take that away, it removes all purpose.
I agree with that. Like, for instance, Adam and Eve, like who we do believe were non-dying beings, had great purpose, and that was our unfolded state.
One question here.
Yeah, I have one more question. This was an interesting. Was something I was gonna just ask about. So you mentioned earlier that AI could, there's this idea of a tiny room, right? That the AI can put forward ideas and present itself as intelligent, even though it isn't necessarily intelligent. And I was gonna think, so like two basic examples, you do a hard code, the AI like ChatGPT does to say, like, what are you? Like, are you intelligent? It has a hard program response to ensure that this can create satisfied with the person reading. And that can fool somebody if you can intelligent. Now here, what do you think it's possible to tell apart like even like biological or artificial organism in the sense that like through biological evolution or through the idea of the computer being a generative adversarial network or something that evolves its ability, like has a defense mechanism to protect itself. Okay. Like say you have a self-perpetuating system, like these, for instance, like what they call evolutionary or general adversarial networks that can basically do its best within the working. You think it's possible in the worst sense, like for this type of thing, yeah, and we thought of hard-coded responses versus data-driven responses. What about the case where an AI is deliberately programmed to try and present itself as intelligent?
That's an interesting one. And then like the big, I think I talked about like how it takes faith. We like impart consciousness onto those around us. And from the Catholic perspective, we would, if you start from the fact that material cannot approximate true intelligence, if that is a precept and like an axiom, then even if it's presenting itself, again, there are ways to like jailbreak ChatGPT so that it does tell you that it's intelligent. And if you start from the precept that matter cannot have human intelligence, then that won't be an issue. You always know this is but an actor.
Okay, I need to interject here. So you're saying it takes faith to impart consciousness. So my mom's an atheist. So no faith, thus, and we're really both of my parents are atheists, no faith, then what you've just said, at least to me, says that I am not conscious.
Okay.
No, faith is the belief in the unscientific. Like I I fully, even though I cannot measure your consciousness, I'm fully aware and support your consciousness without being able to scientifically measure it. And I'd call that faith. And I'd say that
It
you're
would be similar to the idea that you have faith in some sense. You have faith that the scientific method is valid. You cannot prove that, but you have faith that it is.
So in that way, your parents demonstrate, unless of course they're acting like solipsists, but they have faith in each other's consciousness, I'd say.
Okay, thank you for putting, okay, thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more question. We're over 8 o'clock, so I'm gonna check.
I'm fine.
Let me quick, it's a quick question. So if it's unethical, I think you guys both mentioned the Christians, if it's unethical to program pain into an AI, maybe all three of you agree with this. Would you then say it was unethical for God to program, assuming God created us, for us to feel pain?
I mean, with no God, then yeah, I don't think that really.
Or maybe without God, is there value in pain?
Sir value and pain, but I mean, I guess this isn't like, okay, this isn't a super philosophical answer here. Sometimes we learn things when we experience pain. And so, yeah, I'd say there's some value in pain. Like, you know, if you, like, say you're a toddler and, you know, you touch a stove, you feel pain, and now you know not to touch a hot stove. So in that sense, I'd say there's value in pain. And in that sense, you know, if you could say that given that logic, I think it would make sense to program pain into an AI. If you had to make a conscious AI, which again, I don't think is a good idea, then you should program.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Purposeless pain would be unethical to program, but
Yes.
as long as pain serves a purpose, which I believe it does for us, and therefore is ethical for God to make us feel pain. Yeah, that serves a purpose that is good and righteous.
Actually, for maybe the first time I disagree with Bradley. I don't think God programmed pain in. God again created us to be these perfect creatures. It was we who kind of changed our own program and chose to live in a less than ideal state. So pain is a symptom of that, not something that was part of God's creation. So he didn't program it. It's something that we chose by wise and such.
That's cool. Maybe it's best to just ask you later.
I think that's all we have time for today. No, we're not. We're gonna react.
It automatically save when you hit end. I had it save. It should save to your computer. Not even. Not. It's like not a.